Gamilith an Amrâl, A Letter for a Lover, by Midnight Blue. Chapter 1. Before Winter Makes Us Bleed. Bilbo Baggins's letter was different from all the others Thorin had received at that time. First, Bilbo actually got his name right. Very little people cared to learn Thorin's name those days, so most of his packages were sent as to the blacksmith in the woods. He used to have a name, a title, and a kingdom. And then, after the Dragonfire, all was left were ashes, a hunted, kingless kingdom, and the bitter taste of defeat. Yet somehow, as if a miracle, there it was. To Mr. Thorin, blacksmith from Erebor. It almost made him sound like he was still someone important. Thorin's days at that time were what seemed to be an endless cycle of boredom and echoes of past regrets. He would wake up, eat, work, wash, sleep. Repeat and repeat and repeat. Erebor was a skeleton of what it used to be before, and so was Thorin. Dwalin used to visit him once in a few months, and he would always ask, "How are you, my friend?" The answer was always the same lie. Just all right. Thorin still had nightmares of the day Erebor fell. His mirror, left forgotten at the back of his cabin close to the woods, was taken by Thorin's own hands from his bedroom. He could barely stomach looking at his own reflection. He would kick and turn in his bed, countless sleepless nights, where the ghosts of the past would not let him rest. Sometimes, he could swear he still heard the screams. He used to have hobbies. He sang, he danced at parties, he told stories to the bright-eyed younglings who were always eager to listen to his tales. He used to practice jewelry with Keely and blacksmith with Feely, an excuse just to spend time with them. He used to be a son, a grandson, a brother, an uncle, a prince, and a warrior. And then, he became a failure. Wake up, eat, work, wash, sleep, repeat. Kings like those in men's lands would think his misery was linked to his loss. The castle, his room, his treasure. Fools. His deep self-hate, the reason why he could barely look at his own reflection, was because he couldn't stand to look into the eyes of the prince that swore to protect his people, his home, and had failed. No excuse would ease that wound. Thorin failed. There was blood in Thorin's hands, and it didn't matter how many moons came and went, he still saw red. When he did sleep, he would be haunted by memories of the day of fire and ashes, of the bits and pieces of bodies in the streets, of the cries of the children, the helpless, pleading mercy. Thorin remembers he wandered that day. Where were the gods? How could they let his people suffer such a fate? Did he fail them too? If given the opportunity, Thorin would bargain with Lady Fate. He would beg her to let him die, if that meant his people still had a roof over their heads. Make him turn to ashes, as if that would mean his people were safe. Days turned to months. Seasons changed, and the more time passed, the more Thorin's helplessness grew. And then, he gave up. Erebor was gone, and so was the legendary Oaken Shield warrior. Fallen, at last, but not in battle. Forgotten by name. Ignored by those who still remembered that Erebor once used to have a warrior. Until one day, a package with a letter came to his door. To Mr. Thorin, blacksmith from Erebor. From Mr. Bilbo Baggins from the Shire. Ignoring the fact that Thorin had never heard of a Shire before, the next unusual thing about Bilbo Baggins was that his letter, where customers normally described what the item they sent was and what repairs were needed, was nothing like Thorin had ever received. The sudden sweet floral scent that came out of the box made Thorn feel a sparkle of curiosity. It had been years since he last felt the smallest bit of curiosity over anything at all. The feeling was nearly a stranger at that point. Mr. Baggins's letter was written in a thick, fancy... Thorn sniffed at the letter. Scented lilac paper. What in Mahal's name? There's very little people on Yavanna's blessed earth that cared about letters enough to lose their coins over scented paper. Thorn peeked at the name on the package again. Bilbo Baggins, from the Shire. Neither Bilbo nor Baggins was an elven name. Didn't sound like a men's clan name either. But the letter, thick lilac paper, that brought to Thorn's cabin a scent of lavender and spring, written on deep violet ink, was clearly written by a royalty of some kind. There was no insignia, however. No title either. Perhaps Mr. Bilbo Baggins was the closest this Shire had to a king. Or prince. If this Master Baggins had time to write such a fancy letter for Thorn, he was most likely a prince. Not a crown prince either. Thorn remembers how awfully busy he was during his prince days. Not an elf, not a man. Orcs didn't write fancy letters, and Thorn had only seen once a dwarf getting such an extravagant correspondence. Years ago, at Erebor. A letter for his sister, Dis, from a commoner. The letter, written in a nice, but average paper, had a poetry of some sorts. It ended with, "And I must send you this rose, nursed and picked by my own very hands, as I believe my princess to be as fair as a rose, beauty and thorns alike, as delicate and dangerous as one." Dis had laughed so hard, not unlike the whole table, at such a scandalous, frivolous letter that she nearly broke her chair. She laughed and joked and laughed some more. And yet, when the moon had risen, the letter was nowhere to be seen. And since that day, a dried rose was easily spotted at Dis's room the next few weeks. It took Thorn 6 months to know that Dis was exchanging correspondence with the brave commoner, and more 5 months for said commoner to leave anonymity, to become consort of the Princess of Erebor. Fili was born 2 years later, and Kili 5 years after the firstborn's birth. Thorn leaned on the table. "Greetings, Master Thorn. My name is Bilbo Baggins, the rightful heir to Bag End, the loveliest place on the Shire, in my most humble opinion. With winter dreadfully stretching its claws into the Shire, I was reminded of some long-awaited repairs that must be done until the longer, colder months come. While chatting with some of my neighbors, your services have been very much recommended, a blessing of Yavanna herself. You see, we do have a family of barely decent blacksmiths here in the good old Shire. However, all of them are related to Lobelia. If you're not familiar with that name, and I must add how I envy you for this ignorance, Lobelia Sackville Baggins is, much unfortunately, my relative. That dreadful nightmare born of a woman is married to my cousin, Otho, who is just as much a bad news as Lobelia, I must warn. Her greediness knows no limits, always scheming, plans born from her endless gold lust, that terrible woman. Please do apologize for what I'm about to say. I can swear to you that I was raised to become one of the finest gentle hobbits this blessed Shire has ever seen. However, I would much rather crew off my lovely feet with my own bare teeth than give any of my coin to Lobelia, directly or indirectly, as I worry that even being at the same room as her, breathing the same air and sharing space, would stain my soul." Thorn had to stop reading to take a breather. He hadn't realized how hard he was laughing until his cheeks started to hurt. Who on earth was this person? The letter didn't end there either. "As I have mentioned, there are a few items that must be repaired before the cold months. Your work has been very much appreciated here in the Shire. A few of my neighbors went personally to your forge a few months ago while coming back from a trip. They lavished praise upon your outstanding work, especially for your attention to details and flawless craft. I've seen some of the repair you, sir, have done with some of their door handles, and I must say that the fame of craft masters that dwarves hold are no exaggeration at all." Thorn feels his cheeks and ears burn. It wasn't often that people complimented him. Blacksmiths were mainly ignored. People had no respect for the crafts like his home used to have. And yet, there it was. Bilbo Baggins. I have sent a list of items that are in need of repair, and descriptions of them. You shall find the list inside the basket. Please do write back to me what items can be repaired, how much I will owe you, and how much time would it take. Do not rush, however. The only items that are really urgent are the kitchenware. Those 7 meals per day won't make themselves, am I right? Thorin had more questions than answers. Who was this Master Bilbo Baggins, after all? What unholy Yavanna's name would be a gentle hobbit? And what did Mr. Baggins mean about 7 meals per day? Wait, Thorin thought. If Master Baggins hadn't sent the items, what was the wooden box package? Most people didn't even ask Thorin before sending their items. They sent a single silver coin, sometimes with no explanation at all about what Thorin should fix. It was indeed extremely considering of Master Baggins to not only send a letter beforehand, but also something else. Thorin peeked at the small wood package. His fingers itched with curiosity. He didn't even finish reading the letter before opening the small wooden box. Inside of it, a tiny basket with a rolled-up list of items, this time in green paper with a fresh mint scent, and for Thorin's absolute surprise and delight, 5 small jars of jam in a small, simple metal box. The glass jars were tiny, just about the size of his hand, maybe 2 portions of jam in each jar. Each of them were properly identified: strawberry, blueberry, raspberry, passion fruit, and pepper. Thorin didn't even know pepper jam existed. Erebor was great in size and riches, but not so much in fruits. Most of those berries he had just heard about. Inside the metal box, a few fresh sugar cookies, perfectly baked and golden around the edges. Thorin read the final lines of the letter. Farewell, Master Thorin. Hopefully this letter will find you well, and the treats will be of your taste. They were made by my own hands, and if I learned anything about my sugar cookies in the Springfest, is that I have a talent for sweets. Please do tell me if you enjoyed them. With much thanks, Bilbo Baggins. For the first time in many years, the woods heard the booming laughter of an exiled prince. Winter might even be showing its claws, but for the first time in what seemed to be forever, the cold wind brought with itself an air of promise of a brighter future. 1 week later, at Bag End, a normal, chillier evening. One of Bilbo Baggins' favorite daytime activities was to sunbathe. However, even the sun sets in paradise. With time slipping by, winter was once again coming, and it would be way too cold to stay outside. Unless you were fond of runny noses, that is. For that same reason, Bilbo found himself relaxing at the sun as much as possible, breathing the fresh, chillier air, appreciating his pretty roses before winter took them from Bilbo. Grey Took 2 Feet came with the mail a bit later than normal. Letters from all places, he said. With winter, there were more people looking for jams and picked vegetables. And if there's one thing hobbits were masters of, it was food. Dwarves were masters of creation and craft, elves were warriors of the mind, and men were the masters of the heart. But hobbits knew how to live, not just how to survive. Winter was time to sell big stocks. Bilbo himself had spent most of his evening just 2 days before finishing a couple orders. He wouldn't need the money, if not by his addiction to books. Some people worked to conquer the world. Bilbo had smaller plans. He wished to see the world in other people's words, to lose himself in sentences, paper, and ink. After a brief chat with Mr. Twofoot, "Many orders, Mr. Baggins, many orders to make and to send," Bilbo organized his mail into 2 piles. Letters from his extended family, most likely invitations for birthday celebrations and whatnot, and orders to send. At the end of his mail pile, however, there was a simple letter in cream paper, with an unfamiliar sharp calligraphy. From Master Thorin of Erebor, the blacksmith, to Master Bilbo Baggins of the Shire. Oh, yes, the dwarf blacksmith that his neighbors talked about. What a surprise to hear from him so soon. As more of his neighbors passed to and fro with hurry, one Bilbo Baggins was sat by his flower bed, with the sun shining on him. People moved on with their lives. Meanwhile, quietly like the whisper of raindrops falling from the sky, the heir of Bag End was falling a bit in love. Mr. Baggins, hopefully this letter will find you well. Many thanks for your thoughtfulness. I have read your list, and the cost will be 2 silver coins. Worry not, I shall finish all your items in about 10 days. Please send them as soon as it is convenient to you. In other business, I cannot, even with a few hours pondering, remember the last time a client had been so proper. I'm afraid I've never heard of such a place as your shire. But from your letter, your education, and outstanding grammar, I do wonder if I must call you your highness? Forgive my ignorance, but is the shire your domain? Or does it have another way of ruling? Mr. Baggins, your letter has brought the scent of the spring to my humble cabin, even with the colder months so nearby. How lovely it was to have a letter so gracefully written, with such comedy on its prose, and sent with such care. Your package has delighted me beyond words. Never before have been sent such treats. You, sir, are very skilled indeed. Very often people have the misconception that dwarves only work as blacksmiths. The truth is that we value any kind of craft. I myself have friends who are masters of baking, crown making, calligraphy, and such. Your services would be greatly appreciated. I wonder if I have your permission to share your delicious treats. I have read your letter 100 times, and it has never failed to make me laugh. Indeed, I do not know, thankfully it seems, any Lobelia. And, I am very sorry for that, I am not familiar with the Baggins family. If my education allowed me, I would ask you, sir, why you despise that woman so much. But alas, my mother would truly leave the great halls of Mandos just to smack me if I did such a thing. Your treats were, as I have said, will properly repeat like a fool, absolutely delicious. The sugar cookies were fresh, the jams were an adventure of some sorts. You see, Erebor is great in many things, but not that many dwarves particularly care about gardening. Most of your berries were unfamiliar to me, and I must shamefully confess that I didn't even know that there is such a thing as pepper jam. It had an amazing flavor. I ate it with the roasted duck and fresh bread from the pub near my cabin. This jam of yours can be very famous among my kind. We have a taste for bold, strong flavors. I'm afraid I have run my mouth much more than necessary, so I shall leave you, sir, to enjoy your day. Many greetings, Mr. Thorn from Erebor. Oh, Bilbo whispered into the soft wind. Among his roses and the light scent of rain, getting closer as the dawn came, Bilbo Baggins fell a bit in love.